everyone know that this is being recorded. So officially, hello, welcome everyone to today's webinar. We're going to be breaking down the emerging cloud trends this year for US federal governments. My name is Alexandra. I will be your MC during this session. So again, thank you all for joining us today. I just want to go over some housekeeping rules. So during the webinar, everyone's microphones are going to be muted. However, webinar is formatted to be open discussion. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat at the bottom of your screen at any point. But we will open for questions at the end of the webinar. And again, this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to everyone via email. So I'd like to move forward and introduce and give some background on our panelists for today's webinar, Miles Brown and Greg Phelps. Miles is the Senior Cloud and DevOps Advisor with us at Tech Data ExitCertified. He's got over 20 years of experience in the IT industry across a variety of platforms. He's been recognized as an AWS Authorized Instructor Champion and a Google Cloud Platform Professional Architect and Instructor. He's been delivering award-winning authorized IT training for some of the biggest cloud providers. We also have Greg Phelps joining us on the call. Greg is an experienced sales leader with us at Tech Data ExitCertified, excuse me. He has over a dozen years in selling complex, high-value software and services to the federal government. So with that said, I'd like to introduce and let Miles and Greg take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Alexandra. Well, we're happy to be here today talking to you about some of the emerging cloud trends that we're seeing with U.S. federal clients. Greg deals with a lot of our U.S. federal clients. I'm a little bit more on the technical side, so I'll probably be talking more specifically about the trends that we're seeing in cloud. And then we'll get Greg to come back in and talk a little bit more about how he can help you get the training you need. So this is what our outline is going to look like. We're going to talk a little bit about cloud usage at federal agencies, what are typical workloads we see in the cloud. We'll talk about some of the different public cloud providers, kind of the, what they each do well. And then we'll get into three big trends that we see. And then just a little bit about ExitCertified and our cloud offerings at the very end. So I guess, Greg, question to you, what are you seeing as far as the outlook going forward for cloud usage at federal agencies?
Increase.
Yeah.
The transition to the cloud is increasing. We're seeing that in the different civilian agencies, as well as the Department of Defense and some of the independent agencies. What's interesting, though, and this slide refers to that, is that over the last couple of years, the larger budget spend has been on the civilian side. But according to the Department of Defense, they recently announced a large contract, roughly $9 billion, give or take a few dollars, over the next couple of years that'll be in the defense spend. And so we're predicting that over the next couple of years, larger percentage of budget is going to be going to the defense side, but in the cloud. And so we're seeing that across the different vendors that we're going to talk about in a moment. And then as well as some of them are doing sort of a hybrid approach as well.
Yeah. I saw that big announcement. They said they're going to announce maybe the full breadth of it at the end of this year. And it was, across four major cloud vendors, AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and some with Oracle Cloud. And that replaces some of the things that they were doing in the past. But yeah, I think we'll see very different numbers next time Dell Tech puts out this graph. They do one of these every year. I think we'll see the defense spending is going to maybe outpace the civilian agencies. Probably worth taking a quick look at what kind of workloads do people run in the cloud. A lot of organizations, their first foray into the cloud is they bought some commercial off-the-shelf application that runs in Microsoft Azure, for example. And so they get Azure so they can run this app. And they might not have to do much with Azure. It's just running this software. And so that's actually sometimes how you get into multi-cloud as well, right? You might have, hey, AWS is our cloud provider of choice, but this app that we bought runs on Azure. And so we end up kind of being multi-cloud, you know, through no fault of our own. It just happens. Right? Many organizations, when they really get into the cloud, they start by replatforming some of their existing apps, right? We often call that the lift and shift. So they take their existing app, they say, okay, let's run this in the cloud. And that's a great way to learn about the cloud. You end up learning a lot about how the particular cloud vendor services work. But those existing apps are rarely designed well to take advantage of all the benefits of the cloud. And so what we found was, we started doing AWS training back in 2014, right? And we saw a lot of customers would come and take, cloud training from their vendor of choice. Eventually we started doing Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud training as well, and even Oracle. But AWS was sort of our first foray into it. And so what we found was a lot of our customers, it was a journey, right? They started with, okay, we're going to take some entry-level classes in AWS. We're going to lift and shift some apps. And then 3-4 years later, they were back taking another round of classes where they said, now we need to really take advantage of all of the benefits of the cloud. And we're starting to look at what we call cloud native architectures. And so a lot of times that means taking advantage of things like containers and Kubernetes. And so those are some open source technologies. So it's not necessarily training from the cloud vendor, right? A lot of organizations are looking to take advantage of what we call serverless architectures. Typically the original way people would run things in the cloud, they would get virtual machines, but that virtual machine is, you go to AWS or Azure, or Google Cloud, you launch either a Windows instance or a Linux instance, right? And AWS is in charge of everything up to and including the installation of that operating system. But then on top of that, you still need somebody to manage that Linux, right? Well, the idea with these serverless architectures is not that there's no servers, it's that my cloud vendor takes care of them. So it's very developer centric. My developer says, here's some code. I don't want to think about the servers on which it runs. And so that's very attractive to a lot of organizations as a way of designing new apps and really taking advantage of the cloud. And then the last thing we see is that once people are running a lot of workloads in the cloud, they're generating a lot of data there, and it's all stored in one central place, which means, hey, we've got a lot of data. We want to make data-driven decisions. Let's start doing analytics in the cloud, right? So if you only have a few apps in the cloud, you're probably grabbing all your data out of there and bringing it back into your existing analytics infrastructure. But it turns out, the cloud is really well suited for doing analytics because it's got really cheap storage. It holds data in a way that it won't lose it. And it's sort of infinitely scalable, right? So it can handle big data and the kinds of data mining and machine learning techniques that we want to do on that data to make informed decisions. And so these are the kinds of workloads that we're seeing people run. Now, where are they running them? Well, public cloud. So let's take a quick look at the major providers of public cloud. I've mentioned AWS a few times. They sort of got things rolling way back in 2006. That was, 4 to 5 years before their two biggest competitors which are Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud, right? They came along in 2010, 2011. And so AWS had a pretty good head start. It's the most mature, most popular platform. They captured a lot of market share in that time. But Azure came along, Google Cloud, and Azure has really chipped away at that, and they are doing very well. Eventually, IBM and Oracle threw their hat in the mix, and what we see is that IBM, it's great if you're just running IBM stuff in the cloud. Oracle, though, is starting to pick up. They've got a few big customers that are using Oracle Cloud. They have some things that they do really well. And so, we will talk about what's the hot spot, which are each of these really good at. Now, if you just look at, across the industry at market share, or even just something like Gartner, they put out these Magic Quadrants every year for cloud infrastructure, and AWS has been in the top right the whole time. but Microsoft and Google Cloud probably snuck up about 4 years ago into that top right quadrant. And so, AWS continues to be the best in its ability to execute, but we're seeing Azure and Google Cloud really get closer there in terms of completeness of vision. Okay. Here's a little bit on that market share. AWS has been steady around, somewhere between 31, 36%, depending who's doing the research. But Azure has really pulled up. Like, it used to be around 15%. Now it's over 20. So they're really taking a big chunk out of things. And then you've got a whole bunch of other, much smaller players. And again, there's a lot of different places to get these stats, and they don't all agree, but they all kind of agree in what's the top three for sure. Right? And then, there are some outliers here where we talk about Alibaba and Tencent, where it's really, they're just in China. So if we exclude that, that gives you an idea. IBM's been very much on the decline, and Oracle, it hovers up and down a little bit. Now, the case for each provider, well, first off, why would you use AWS? Well, you can always say nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd, right? It's popular because it's popular. There's people that know it. It's easier to hire somebody who knows it because a lot of people know it. It's probably, and this is my opinion. I don't have a lot of stats for this. I used to have a pretty good stat for this, but and now so out of date, I can't use it, but it seems to have the least amount of downtime of the big three. Although when they are down, it's the most high profile, right? Because half the internet doesn't work that day. And so, that happened twice last year. It doesn't happen very often, but it happened twice last year, and everybody got scared and said, well, maybe I should be moving to Azure. But I think you'll find with Azure, it happens more often than that.
Would it be safe to say that they've got the biggest network, like the biggest network to make that stay up all the time?
No. I mean, I think you can make a case that, like, as far as network, Google Cloud has the best network because it's built on that same network that Google Search uses, right? So I mean, there's that. But it's the biggest business of these, right? It's hard to see how much, like, when you look at how much they make on cloud, because when you look at Azure, it's all tied up with Office 365 as part of their cloud offering. And everybody's got that, so it's really difficult to kind of see how big are these businesses. Yeah. Even with AWS, it's hard to kind of split it out from Amazon.com, right? But most people that have used multiple clouds will tell you that, AWS is probably the best in terms of overall breadth and depth of services. It's got the most mature and popular serverless options using Lambda. So, if it's so great, why would I use Azure? Right? Well, I find that a lot of companies, it's easy to embrace Azure because you've already got some sort of a service agreement with Microsoft, right? Because you're probably using Office 365, or other stuff. If you are a .NET shop, right? You mostly build .NET applications, you're using SQL Server. If you're a Microsoft shop, then it makes a lot of sense to go to Azure, right? It's also very popular with people who are doing hybrid stuff because of Azure Stack, which makes it really easy to buy hardware and run it in your own data center, but run it the same way you run your stuff in the cloud. They did a really good job of that hybrid. And then the last reason why people embraced Azure in a lot of places was because they were quick to build a presence in a lot of countries before some of the others. So I'm based in Canada. I help Greg a lot with the US stuff, but I'm based in Canada where Microsoft was there probably a year or two before AWS. And so, if you have data sovereignty laws where your data must stay in a certain place, that might be the only option, right? Now, all three of the big three cloud vendors are kind of everywhere now, and they borrow a lot from one another, right? So what they did with Azure Stack, Google Cloud kind of did something similar with Anthos, and Azure, AWS now has something called Outposts, although it's pretty expensive. Right? If you do look at Google Cloud, it's very popular with organizations that are really heavily into machine learning and AI. If you think about it, Google actually built TensorFlow, which is probably the most popular of the machine learning frameworks. And that's based on their deep expertise of doing R&D in machine learning. They also created Kubernetes. And so they do a pretty great job of, running a managed Kubernetes for you, right? And they probably have the cheapest pricing, although it's very difficult to figure out, apples to apples comparison, right? First off, if you're a really big customer of any one of these, you're probably not paying the regular rate that they show, right? They have enterprise agreements. There's all kinds of volume discounts. It's really hard to figure that out. But Google Cloud seems to be a little cheaper. And then I did mention they have Anthos for hybrid and multi-cloud environments. So, they each have their sort of hotspot of what they do well. And that's probably a big reason why our first trend we're going to look at is multi-cloud, right? And so that is the thing that we're seeing. And as Greg mentioned, that big announcement that Department of Defense is doing about the their cloud spend is that it will be across multiple cloud vendors because they see people using multiple cloud vendors. And this isn't just a US federal thing. This is across the industry. When somebody like Flexera, they do their state of the cloud report, they poll a lot of people who are working cloud and ask them what they're doing. And they found that most people are what they would call multi-cloud, which is actually, not necessarily that they're all using multiple public clouds, but they might have a private and a public cloud. And so that kind of hybrid environment is actually what most people are doing, right? Often it's a way to ease into the public cloud, but still leveraging your existing data center investment, right? You're not going to shut them down. You spent all this money and built these data centers, filled them with equipment. You're going to try and make use of that wherever you can. And so some of the patterns that we see is something called cloud bursting. Okay? We're on Zoom platform right now. Zoom told us way back in 2014 when we first started using them for our virtual training, they told us they did run their own data centers. And at that time, they were actually running all of their Zoom workloads in their own data centers, but they were using AWS as excess capacity. If they got particularly busy, they could sort of do what we call cloud bursting, right? Use that public cloud vendor. Now, eventually when the pandemic came, they said, we're going to have to be able to use AWS and Azure and Google Cloud because Zoom got very, very popular. And so, we kind of saw that firsthand because we were like an early user of Zoom and we got to talk to them a lot, help them beta test some of their capabilities even. Increasingly, we're finding that customers want to use multiple public clouds to maybe avoid lock-in, to say, hey, I can move workloads wherever I want. That's difficult to do. There are some frameworks to help with that. Or they want to run the workload where it makes the most sense to take advantage of the sweet spot. Like maybe I'm mostly using AWS, but I have heavy duty machine learning people that want to take that data, move it to Google Cloud and use those tools, right? So we're starting to see a lot of that. But what we don't see a lot of is organizations running the exact same workloads in multiple public clouds, right? Because what that means is you kind of have to make the workload not take advantage of all the extra bells and whistles. It's got to be kind of the lowest common denominator to be able to run anywhere. Or you get some sort of a framework to help offer some of those bells and whistles that the cloud vendor normally would provide, but the framework, like something like Red Hat OpenShift, will provide some of that platform as a service offering. And now I can move this, I can run it in my own data center, I can run it in Azure, I can run it in Google Cloud, I can run it in AWS. And so there's a lot of these frameworks that help. Speaking of these frameworks, things like OpenShift is built on top of Kubernetes. That's part of what we talked about, that concept of cloud native technologies becoming a big trend, right? So what is this cloud native? Yeah, it's certainly a buzzword that you hear a lot. And over the last 5 years, it's become a big buzzword. And it's basically trying to incorporate a lot of DevOps concepts to get the most out of public cloud usage. So there's a consortium of companies called the Cloud Native Compute Foundation, and they sort of describe its let's see, it's containers, service meshes, microservices, declarative APIs. These things are helping us build these loosely coupled systems that are resilient, manageable, and observable, and really take advantage of everything the cloud has to offer. Now, one of the things they mentioned in there is microservices, right? And so let's take a quick look at that. When organizations build software, in the past, they built, some big application, and the unit of deliverable is the whole application. And so it takes months to build, you deploy it, and then maybe every 6 months you would go in and make some changes to it. And when you went to deploy it, it would take 2 weeks to fight all the fires every time you went to deploy it. And so, it was really in the early 2000s, AWS internally had these problems where they just kept adding and adding developers, and it wasn't helping, it was actually making the problem worse. And so they said, what if we took this huge monolithic application and blew it up into hundreds, maybe even thousands of little microservices? And each microservice can be independently built, tested, and scaled. Now, they did this hand in hand with redesigning their teams that develop and ship software into what they called 2 pizza teams. That's sort of a DevOps term that they came up with, which was, maybe it's a group of 8-10 people at the most, right? You could feed them with 2 pizzas. And, maybe it's a few developers, a couple testers, and maybe an operations person. And that group is in charge of one or maybe a small set of microservices from end to end. They build the roadmap, they collect the requirements, they build it, test it, deploy it, and they manage it in production. They fix the problems, right? And so that group is really closely aligned. And so they're in charge of that one microservice. They can make changes as much as they want. As long as they don't change the interface to it, they don't have to tell anybody about it, right? And there's lots of ways to implement microservices. Probably the biggest way these days is through something called containers. Now, you might not know much about containers, but you probably heard of Docker, right? And when Docker came out in 2013, that really made everybody notice containers. Containers had been around for a while. It had been in Linux. But when Docker came out, I think it was a combination of things. Like, the technology itself is very lightweight, so you can basically, on one physical machine, I could launch hundreds or thousands of these little lightweight containers. And they have the code and all the dependencies, everything contained in there. And I can run it on my laptop, I can run it in my own data center, I can run it in a public cloud, right? And it will run the exact same way everywhere. And so that's really nice. So I think it was because it could run anywhere, this idea that microservice is becoming popular, and this seemed like a perfect way to encapsulate one little service. And they had a nice way of finding existing containers and building on top of it. And you can't discount, they had a really great logo, right? So all that came together that everybody said, hey, I like this idea of Docker, right? But when you start taking your huge application and splitting it up into hundreds of these little containers, now you've got hundreds of containers to worry about. And think about, where are they running, right? How do I find this thing after? And so you need some sort of container management tool. And so Docker built their own called Docker Swarm. There was a few other entries. AWS built something internally called Elastic Container Service. But the one that really resonated with people was called Kubernetes. This was created at Google, and then it's now managed by that Cloud Native Compute Foundation, and it's become sort of the de facto standard. This is the way people like to orchestrate hundreds and thousands or thousands of containers. And you can run Kubernetes anywhere. You can run it on your own on-prem, you can run it in the cloud, and it looks the same. In the cloud providers have all kind of stepped up and said, hey, we can help a little bit with that. So they each have their own services for helping manage Kubernetes and make that easier. So that's kind of one way to implement microservices. The other major way is with these little serverless functions. So in AWS, when they came out with Lambda, as a developer, I just say, here's the code, here's the event that causes the code to run. And I don't think about, where is the server where that code's running? What if that server dies? What if we run it many times? I need more servers to run it. I don't think about any of that, right? Amazon's thinking about that. Or it turns out Azure functions, Google Cloud functions, they're all pretty much the same, right? And so you just pay for how long that code runs, and you don't think about the underlying servers. So that's very attractive for a lot of organizations to say, maybe I don't need a whole bunch of people in my staff to manage Linux administration, right? Just like we don't need a bunch of people to plug servers into a network anymore, because we're letting our cloud vendor do that. So that's a big trend, is to go to either serverless or containers. Either way you cut it, it's sort of all under the umbrella of cloud native. And the third big trend I want to talk about is doing analytics in the cloud, and machine learning and AI, things like that. So when we talk about analytics, the first type of analytics, which probably everybody's familiar with, is what we call like descriptive analytics. This is where you're kind of usually looking backwards. You're looking back in time saying, hey, what happened in our business? And maybe that will help us make some decisions going forward, right? And so most organizations have been doing this since the 90s. You might have a data warehouse and you grab data from all kinds of different places, clean it up, extract it, transform it, and load it into the data warehouse. We call that ETL. And then once we have it in the data warehouse, which is really just a relational database designed for really big queries, then we connect to it with a business intelligence tool like Tableau or Microsoft Power BI or IBM Cognos. There's lots of popular BI tools, but they connect, and then you can build dashboards and reports and things like that. The next kind of level of analytics is predictive analytics, where you're sort of saying, I want to look for patterns in my historical data that help me maybe forecast the future. And a lot of times this makes use of machine learning, right? And machine learning is, usually in the past, this has been completely the purview of some data scientists, right? They're going and sifting through our data and, coming up with some analytics and predicting things about the future. Now, these days, what we're seeing is, it's hard to hire a data scientist. I have a slide on this coming up, and so we're starting to see some of the cloud vendors are actually building machine learning into some of their services to make it available to anybody to use, right? These days, if I want to, if I have just a bucket full of images, and I have thousands and thousands of images, I could say, hey, I want to go use, every one of the cloud vendors has a service like this where you say, go and index all those images. And then I want to do a search later and say, show me all the images which are of a woman wearing sunglasses. And I want you to be at least 90% sure, right? And so you don't have to build and train that machine learning algorithm and know all about math, right? They've already done that. Right. And they've indexed it and they've labeled it with a bunch of things. They have a picture. They said, is this a person? Yes. Are they wearing glasses? Yes. Is it a sunglasses? Yes. Do we think it's a woman? Maybe. Right. And so they say, okay, we're this % sure. Right. So that's kind of cool, and so predictive analytics is where most people are now. The kind of interesting one is prescriptive analytics, where you're trying to say, if this happens, what should my business do? Right? Really trying to optimize going forward for the business. This makes heavy use of machine learning, and you typically do need that real data scientist to do that part. Now, when we talk about analytics in the cloud, you can use a lot of the same techniques and tools that you're used to. You might have Hadoop, you might have a data warehouse. You can often run those same things in the cloud, not a data warehouse appliance like Teradata, but your cloud vendor will have an equivalent service. And certainly the cloud does offer some great benefits for big data, right? You have very cheap, durable storage, seemingly infinite scalability, right? And the public cloud vendors do all offer great services for the analytics stack, right? Now, there are some newer cloud analytics companies that come along. And of course, because they're newer, they say, hey, we know your data is in the cloud already, so we'll work with that data in AWS or Azure. And so you can run Databricks on top of that. Or you can have it grab that data and pull it into Snowflake, right? And so there's a lot of these tools that come around. And so this is a big trend that we're seeing, is people doing all of their analytics in the cloud. I did mention things like hiring a data scientist is very hard, right? Because the data science is sort of, you have to know computer science and how to program, but you have to know some heavy duty math and stats, and you have to understand the domain, like whatever your data is about. And so, hiring that's hard to do, right? There's many articles out there that tell you about how hard it is to hire. These days, colleges do have these programs, but it might be easier to train somebody with the in-house with 2 of these and let them get the third, I think what we're seeing is that, down the road in the future, machine learning expertise will just be another tool in the software engineer's tool belt, right? And we're already kind of seeing that when we look at the trends. We're starting to see a lot of machine learning built in to make data science available to the masses. So a lot of auto ML tools, things like I mentioned, image recognition, natural language processing, recommendation engines, so we see that a lot. Another big trend we see in analytics is the automation of things, right? So in the past, data science has been very exploratory. It's just a few cowboys grabbing data and playing with it. Now we're seeing companies say, this is mission critical to us, right? And so we need to kind of automate as much of that as possible. So the ingestion and replication of data, the validating of the data, the preparing of it, creation of dashboards, we can automate all that. So that's a big trend that we're seeing. So we talk a lot about, a cloud journey and talking about when people move to the cloud, there's different reasons to jump in, and there's different goals of using the cloud. Like I mentioned, some people's goal is to say, I want to get out of the data center business, right? I want to just run stuff and not worry about leasing land and buying hardware, right? Some people say, I want to get out of the Linux administration business, so I want to get into serverless, right? But anybody that moves to the cloud, what we find is that it's rarely just a change of who's running my data center, right? That's kind of the first level is, hey, I want to let somebody else run data centers for me. And what we really find is when we see an organization moving to the cloud, they're often doing 3 things at once. One, they're starting to use a public cloud provider, right? The other things that go hand in hand with that is maybe further embracing the concept of DevOps, right? And so there's DevOps culture, maybe that, changing how your teams build and ship software. Then there's tools to build like an automated pipeline, so when a developer checks in code, it automatically goes and does a bunch of tests and builds and maybe even deploys it right into production for you. And then that other one we mentioned was adopting a microservices architecture. And so that might mean going serverless, it might mean containers and Kubernetes. Any way you cut it, when somebody says we're moving to the cloud, that means there's probably a lot of new skills and various technologies that are going to be involved. To this end, we at ExitCertified, we sort of said, well, our customers come to us because they want, some public cloud training, right? A lot of customers find us because they say, hey, I need an AWS class, and then AWS redirects them to us because we do authorized AWS training. By the way, we also do, Azure and Google Cloud and Oracle Cloud training, right? So where there is a vendor of choice, we like to partner with them, right? And offer that authorized training. But what we found is over the years, people keep coming back to us saying, hey, I need to embrace microservices. So I need to understand that architecture. And I need to understand the tools of Docker and Kubernetes and maybe automating the provisioning of stuff with Ansible and Terraform, and maybe even some of the DevOps culture stuff. Right. And so we've sort of started to build this practice around the public cloud and a lot of it is open source, right? A lot of these things are open source. And so we kind of built this, we called it CloudCentrics. It's basically a suite of tools. Alexander just put the link in the chat about that takes us to the diagram and just talks about CloudCentrics. And so this is sort of how we're engaging with our customers these days, where we come in and we say, hey, somebody says, I need cloud training. Well, we say, okay, well, what does that really mean, right? we gotta get in there and talk to you. And that's a big part of what we do. If a U.S. federal agency is doing something, Greg will bring me or a different, subject matter expert in on a call after the initial call, to get a little bit more info, right? And I guess around those government programs, maybe Greg, you could talk a little bit about what we do special for government customers.
Yeah, sure thing. First of all, thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited to see a pretty good sized crowd coming to the presentation today. So thank you all for coming. So, how do we help the government? Specifically, we've got a couple of different contracts that makes procurement really easy. Most popular one, obviously, GSA. We do have a very robust GSA contract, discounting your pricing and making that transaction really smooth. We also work with SOUP, the SOUP 5 contract. And so if you're looking to get training, your purchaser probably already understands how to work with those two main contracts. And that's what I've done for the last 12 years here, selling training to the CloudCentrix list of classes and brands that Miles had on the previous slide. We also can offer savings for if you've got a larger size group that need a specific class. We can bring, just like Miles said, someone like Miles on the phone and kind of get into the nuts and bolts of what you need taught in your class, and then put that together just for your staff. And for as a private event is how we call that. So volume-based discounts, government contract discounts. Let's see, is this something I can advance to the next slide?
Oh, yeah. What about this where we talk about the single method of payment? Like if somebody has like a larger kind of, okay, we're going to take these 3 classes and we've got 4 cohorts to go through them. You sort of just pay with one big block and then they kind of.
Yeah, there's a couple of advantages to that. One is the volume discount, right?
Yeah.
If you've got a couple of different projects coming up, you've identified what courses are needed. Maybe we've held a conversation to do that. And then you have a timeline of how it needs to be done. There is, like, for example, right now, it is the end of the government's fiscal year. And so it's one of those adages of you got to use it before you lose it, right? The end of September is that date that's approaching on the calendar. And so right now I'm seeing a lot of agencies coming and saying, hey, we have these projects. We need to sort of park the money here for a while, and then we'll use it as it makes sense according to the project that we have. And so we can do that as well. Hold on to it. We could put a training plan together to use it, but maybe the money needs to be used now, but it actually is used. The training is delivered at a later date. So that's something that we've seen a lot of traction with as well recently, and this is the season that's going on.
Yeah. Speaking of things we have going on right now, we do have a promotion, right? What's the deal with this one?
So it's basically, if it's a 5-day class, we're going to knock $500 off your cost. If it's a 4-day class and 3-day class, each day is going to knock $100 off the pricing of your class. And so that's a summer promo going on right now. The promo code is summer500, and you can see a link there. I believe these links will be shared. Yep, there they are in the chat. And so you can click on those and get further details after this presentation is over. And so you see that there. We do have, government training? Yeah, so that's to our website. So there we go.
Yeah.
So we do have our government specific page, has a list of different contracts that we have listed on there, has my contact listed on there as well.
All right.
And then we do have a portal, government specific portal. Right now it's set up for the whole government. What's nice about it is that if you have a government email address and you plug that in, a .gov, a .mil, some of the other agencies have like a .edu, like Smithsonian, for example. We are going to identify you as a government person and automatically apply the GSA rate to your transaction. And so it kind of makes it really easy. That's a common question I get, hey, I'm with the government. I see that it's my shopping cart is showing me the list price, but I should be getting GSA. And so we can handle that by using our government portal, which I don't know any other vendor that does anything like that, which is pretty cool. This promotion that we're running right now ends on August 29th. So now is the time to get your training approvals in through your management, and then I can help you process and get that promotion. So obviously we've got a promotion going on right now. We also have GSA. And so the question might be, hey, I want to make sure I get the better price, right? And so obviously we're not going to charge you a higher price if the promo is better than the GSA rate, would give you the better of the two.
Yeah.
So
And,
benefits of working with us, decades of experience. I've been here for 12 years. Previous to ExitCertified, I was with Oracle, selling to the government. So I've been selling training to the federal government for a number of years. One-stop shop. We have a lot of different brands that we offer training with, and Miles talked about those previously. Not just the cloud, but big enterprise systems as well. Oracle, SAP, IBM, items like that.
VMware, yeah.
And VMware, yeah. Flexible training programs. We can deliver the class using a platform like this, Zoom. We call it IMVP because it's not just the platform that you're using for this presentation, for example. It's also comes with a producer, someone like Alexandra, that can help make sure that the class goes smooth, whether you have any technical challenges or questions or anything like that, not distracting from the rest of the class. And I don't know of any other vendor that offers that. Usually it's the instructor who's got to stop what he's doing to go help John Smith get into the class or whatever it is.
That was a big decision we made. Like, we started doing virtual training back in 2012, which was early days. And I had taken some classes over WebEx or something, and the first 40 minutes of class was wasted on people troubleshooting audio, or oh, I didn't get the course materials. And so we made an effort. We said, we're going to have somebody there to take care of that stuff. And then, just make sure that everything goes smoothly. We think that we did a very good job of virtual training in the beginning, and that set us up well. When the pandemic started, we went from about 60% to 100%. But we are now starting to open up our training centers again across North America. In particular, the one in McLean, Virginia is very popular with U.S. federal clients.
Yeah, that's about a 5-minute walk from the metro. If you're taking metro, that's huge. Yeah. And then it also says there, and I want to highlight it, it says largest guaranteed to run schedule across the different training vendors. Like, who wants to go through all of your approvals? Multiple people need to approve your training. And then you finally get all the approvals done. The money is there. Everything is ready. You're ready to pull the trigger and get a seat to the class. And your purchaser reaches out and makes that happen. And then the class that you're in gets canceled because you were the only one in it. It's very frustrating. And then you got to kind of start all over again. So we have a really large, robust list of classes that are guaranteed to run. Our scale that we do our training allows us to run many of the classes at a smaller number of students in a class. So we don't need like 5 or 8 students in many of our events that are booked in it a couple weeks in advance. So that's huge.
Yeah.
So I want to point that out.
Yeah. And I think the thing I would add, like why ExitCertified, our instructor staff, we have a large, for a training company our size, we have a fairly large in-house training staff. So these are professional instructors that have been in the industry for 20 plus years. But they are dedicated to training and award-winning. We win awards from all those major vendors over the last 5 years. We probably won an award from, most of them at some point. We're backed by a Fortune 100 company, right? TD SYNNEX is a very large company. Even though ExitCertified, that's our go-to-market brand, right? That's all we do is training, but we're backed by this very large, stable company. I think that's probably enough of a sales pitch on why ExitCertified. We should talk about how people can get in touch with you when you're looking longingly by a tree.
I've grown a beard as well.
Oh, yes.
Greg.Phelps@techdata.com. And then my phone number is right there, 202-688-0416. And you have on there also the government portal. And so that's the one that I referred to earlier, where you could purchase right through there. And if GSA pricing applies to that event, then it'll auto apply to your purchase.
Excellent. Well, looks like Alexandra put those links in there. I think all that's left to do is break for any questions you have about how ExitCertified deals with government clients, or more questions for me on trends that we see in the cloud, especially with our federal clients. If you want, you can throw the questions in the chat.
We had some questions pop up while you both were presenting, so we could start off with those, see if any others come in. The first question is, if we're dealing with a large-scale project, how might ExitCertified be beneficial towards said project? You both mentioned flexible training programs, perhaps a bit more in detail. What else can we offer?
Yeah, well, I would say, Greg mentioned that there's that government portal. One thing we've done for some customers that have, a large number of people going through training, and it's, especially multi-vendor kind of training where they're taking a bunch of different classes, and you don't want to like just give them a bunch of links to our website where they're going to, frankly, our website, we have a lot of classes from a lot of vendors. If you want to kind of focus it a bit, we can build that customer portal just for your agency and say, hey, give them this link. It's already got the GSA pricing or soup pricing, whatever we've negotiated, and just the courses that you want to see in there. And so they can go, and especially if you've got that Flex account or whatever the equivalent of it's called, where you've done the prepay, and on the back end, there's some nice reporting. You see who's taken what, and you can find out, how much of that budget have we taken up. So I think that's one big advantage for large customers. Greg, you got anything else for that one?
Yeah, I think that's a great reason to work with us. And also, if you have a stack of folks, maybe they've got different skill sets. You have some people just brand new to the organization, they're just ramping up. They need to learn from how to spell AWS, that kind of level. The folks that have been in the business for quite a long time, maybe in the organization, and they're more advanced. We can help you come up with a training schedule, a training plan geared toward the different levels that people need to get to. They're already at a spot. We can help them, depending on where they are, help them get to where they need to be. And that could be, in a training in a specific line, but also like proof that they've gathered and know the information with the exam vouchers and stuff. So put a package together tailored to what your team needs.
Yeah, and we've built those plans where it's maybe a blend of whatever e-learning you have. You might be taking some of the 101 with e-learning, and then you go to an instructor-led class and then follow it up. That blended approach has become very popular with a lot of our customers.
Yep.
Any other questions?
We don't have any other questions in the chat. One that you kind of already answered was, if we're building a cross-vendor training plan, do you have a palatable way to, offer?
Yeah. So I think probably, we probably covered that. All right. I want to thank everybody for showing up today. And Alexandra, this recording will be sent to everybody.
This recording will be sent to everyone via email, so please keep an eye out for that.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And maybe I'll leave this. Leave this back up. Just a last note. Take a look at his handsome face. All right. Well, we're going to stick around a minute or two. If there's no questions, then we'll shut things down. But thank you for attending. Thanks, Greg, for helping me out.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I do.